very much. I'm Betty Liu. I'm anchor of In the Loop, which airs from 8 to 10 a.m. on Bloomberg Television. And among some of the things that we cover, I mean, we obviously cover the markets, and also the banking industry. I often don't get a chance to cover the advertising industry, which I think is so important and so relevant to what we have been talking about, particularly with how to get consumers back into the markets, how to get them spending, and how does it change with a new technology like the iPad. And so I'm really happy to be here on this panel because all of you, in fact, have been in many ways changing the industry through your careers. What I'd like to do is just introduce and give a short bio of each of our panelists, and I'll do that starting obviously from my left, but that's your right here facing me. First of all is Andrew Bennett. He's the global CEO and also the chief strategy officer of Havas Worldwide, but the global CEO of Arnold Worldwide. And it represents some of the most renowned brands that you know, Hershey, McDonald's. Some of you might know about the viral hit that Arnold had developed with its Filet-O-Fish product, the jingle that kind of went viral on YouTube. Ocean Spray, Volvo. Arnold is head of a company Arnold is a company that employs 1,200 employees and 15 offices. And Andrew himself has received some of the most esteemed awards in this industry, including Boston Business Journal's 40 Under 40 and Crane's New York Business 40 Under 40. Certainly somebody who knows quite a bit about what is going on in this industry. Next to him is Marita Scarfi, who is the CEO of Organic, which is a pure digital shop, and that's a topic that I really do want to get into in this panel. A very interesting career path. I know you started off at Cooper's Lybrand as an auditor, and then you went to the West Coast, and I don't want to oversimplify your distinguished career, but went over into startups in the West Coast, and then joined Organic as a controller, and then made her way up to become the CEO, a key player in taking it public and then private again to Seneca and then selling it to Omnicom. Some of the big clients for Organic include P&G, Kimberly-Clark, as well as Intel and Bank of America. Next to her is Susan Giannino, who is the chairman and CEO of Publicis Worldwide. I know Susan has joined Publicis back in 2003. She led the U.S. operations to a tripling of revenue over the last 3 years. Again, a recipient of many awards, including the most recent, one of my favorite awards, which is the Matrix Women in Communications Award a few years ago. And very interesting, you were a member of you served as a nonpartisan advisor to the George H.W. Bush's Task Force on Terrorism.
The key word is nonpartisan.
Which I'd be curious later on to ask you how that has to do with advertising. But in any case, some of the major clients, you all know Publicis. I mean, they're a huge holding company, but some of the big clients, Coca-Cola, P&G, Nestle, L'Oreal, and Citigroup. Bob Jeffrey, very well known in this industry, the chairman and CEO of JWT, perhaps one of the best known agencies in this world, over 150 years old, or about 150-year-old agency. And Bob is responsible for over 200 offices, 10,000 employees. Some of the biggest clients, Microsoft, HSBC, Ford, Nokia, and I know Bob from watching television is often quoted on various networks and talks quite a bit about the advertising industry. I think some have called you the ambassador of the advertising industry. And Don Coleman is the CEO of Global Hue, which is the country's largest multicultural advertising agency. Adweek named it the Multicultural Agency of the Decade. And some of your key clients include Verizon, Walmart, and also Chrysler. I know there's some interesting things going on in the advertising front with Chrysler. So great to have all of you on here. I didn't mean to take that much time, but all of you have very formidable bios, so I was trying to condense them all into a few minutes. Okay, so first off, what I want to get into is, the topic of this was kind of very, very big in terms of the future of advertising. But really, what is advertising? It's basically trying to sell to the consumer. That's getting harder, right, as you're getting more and more channels. So how do you, these days, sell the most effective way to the consumer? And maybe I just have you all answer that.
I think first and foremost, it starts with understanding the consumer. And I think there's been tremendous developments in the last 5 years in terms of really understanding not just what the consumer wants and how they interact with brands, but how they interact with one another, how they interact with the media. And I think if you look at some of the best marketing, whether it's advertising or promotion or any type of marketing, you can see how there's that linkage. And I think the second component to really, being able to deliver this is to be able to understand, we used to talk a lot about integration as an industry, and I don't think that integration is really anything that we've cracked even today. I think it's really the key component is understanding how each touch point talks to each touch point, what the role is, if I'm doing something online, how that connects to something offline. So I think the kind of ability to really understand both and to create both is what helps drive that.
So for us, I think we look at, to your point, understanding a consumer through data, so consumer-based data that comes up that we can gather through talking to consumers, which is a big part of what we do. We understand we understand the business also as well, because that all comes into understanding how we're going to actually promote to that consumer or market to that consumer. And we understand, for us, we don't look at like the technologies that are there's much of those are important. We really start with the insights that really look at how this consumer is going to engage in the connectedness, to your point of the idea. So it's a lot of the same thing. It has to really start with the consumer, because the landscape out there changes so rapidly that you can't look at a consumer at any point in time and then just say, okay, I'm done. You have to actually look at that quarterly or very frequently.
Because it changes so quickly.
It changes so quickly. And to the point of the iPad, if you're just developing an iPad application without understanding the consumer and the connectiveness to the brand, then you could actually completely miss the mark.
Hold that thought. I definitely want to get into the iPad.
Okay.
Okay, Susan?
The word selling is such a loaded word. I think one of the most fundamental changes in our business is, of course, we're ultimately measured against the extent to which we drive sales for our clients, but what we do to help that doesn't feel like selling anymore. In fact, if it feels like selling, we're probably doing it wrong. So Procter & Gamble has this wonderful kind of new vision, which is they're trying to transform their company to say that they really want everybody in the company, all their partners, to think about moving from selling to consumers to serving people, which when you think about it is a really huge shift. And these days, to win people over, you need to participate, join them, and provide them something useful and help them. So yes, of course, I'm not naive. It's all about creating sales, but what we do to do that doesn't feel like selling anymore, and it probably shouldn't. It's more like serving, providing services, inventing things that are useful.
I mean, it's interesting. Something that you said earlier in the question. I actually think it's not so much a matter of difficulty. I would take the point of view that it's actually a great time for communications, because I think the opportunities and the opportunity to innovate have never been greater. So I think it's all in how you look at it. I look at it from more or less a positive vantage point in terms of what's out there. With all the people we have around the world and all the different market conditions, we have a simple philosophy, which is we create ideas that people want to spend time with. And I think the challenge for everybody, and I agree with what everybody said here, but I guess our angle on it would be that we've moved from a model of people just passively receiving messages to one where consumers have to actively engage. And what I talk about more and more with clients and with our people is about content creation. Because if you look at the multitude of devices out there and the mobility of devices now because of cloud computing and what's going on with consumers' control over what they see, it's about content creation. So whether it's a TV ad or a TV ad that gets purposed on YouTube and so on, it's about, we need to think of ourselves as creators of content. We need to think outside of even the traditional definition of advertising.
Outside of a 30-second commercial.
Outside of a 30-second TV spot. It's not like TV's going away either. I think TV is still great. We had a meeting the other day with the CEO of Viacom who said, TV viewing is still strong. It's just that it's taken place on multiple devices. If you look at that Old Spice work, I mean, that started as a TV campaign, and then the brilliance of what they did in terms of responding to Twitter and YouTube and all of that. So, but I think it's really about content creation. I see that's the pioneering opportunity for us right now in the industry.
I don't want to echo many of the things that have already been said, but at Global Hue, we tend to look at it a little differently, because we believe that our job is to influence the influencers, particularly when you talk about online. So we really want to focus on those individuals that set the trends, that develop consideration, and that really sell our brand, our client's brand, through their own social networking and the like. So we really focus on the influence of the influencer in the marketplace. And certainly content plays a big role in that. Development of content is largely based on that consumer interaction that we understand that needs to be involved with certain brands and certain content and not others. But key for Global Hue, influence the influencers.
Okay, and so what I'm hearing a lot, though, is about, the consumers are smarter. They're obviously smarter. They don't want to just be sold to. It's not about placing an ad in the paper anymore. I mean, that was dead years ago. And it's not about, you don't want to be sold, as Susan was saying, you don't want to be sold to. But, the idea, though, is when I say difficult, because it's fragmented. It's getting more and more fragmented. So what is most effective to hit the mass audience?
Well, I think there's one thing that hasn't changed, and I think the fragmentation really paves the way for this. It's really about ideas, and I think that a lot of times the industry, I think we devalued what we did because we got too caught up in execution in the last decade or so. And I think because of the fragmentation, because of all the different channels, agencies have to get back at what their core competency is, and it is about big, bold brand ideas that can transform a client's business. And I think, to me, that's the change that's going on in the industry, and I think that's why even words like integration are becoming arcane, because that goes beyond integration.
Mm-hmm.
I think also, it would be remiss if we just didn't acknowledge the fact that the consumer in virtually every country around the world, developed and developing, has changed. We talk a lot about mindful consumption. We did a global study, 5,000 consumers, 12 markets. 86% of consumers said they were more proud about saving than they were about spending. That's a huge shift, and obviously that's driven in a large part by the global recession that you can argue where we are in the recession right now. But I think the behavior change that we see among consumers in almost every market around the world has changed how we have to market to them, and even the expression marketing to them. A lot of companies talk about storytelling, we talk about engagement, we talk about content, you talk about ways to build that relationship. And I think first and foremost, it takes a recognition that the consumer doesn't need anything, almost anything we have to sell. They may need some, fast-moving consumer goods, but besides that, they don't really need what we have.
And almost on the flip side of it, and let's just talk about the elephant in the room, which is the Apple iPad and the Apple company itself. Some companies may not even need advertising agencies in order to sell their product. I mean, if you look at Apple, they've got the iPad, they've got the iPhone, the iPod. Why does Apple need an advertising agency? They can just advertise themselves on all of their platforms. Google became this huge multi-billion-dollar company with practically, with ugly advertising, uncreative advertising.
Well, one thing for sure is Apple or very few people need the advertising agencies that existed 5 or 10 years ago. We're in the midst of a pretty radical change in the industry. And one of the things that characterizes this change is there are all sorts of people who can participate in it who weren't participating in it before. I think that's going to be an amazing source of innovation for our industry. All of us are doing the same thing. We're not kind of sitting still. We're all looking at all the different players and all coming in from all the different fronts. And we're looking at them and saying, what can we learn from them? I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm sure learning everything I can from Google, from Apple, from where everybody's kind of
Well, what are you
using.
learning? What specifically?
Well, we're learning all sorts of things from Google in particular, especially Google Labs. We're learning a lot about a different way to approach the creative process, which I think is changing radically anyway. We had our creative process for years and years has really been designed to get the work out, and it's been very craft oriented. The way Google approaches things, to the extreme, is about innovation and inventing new ways of doing things. I think we could all learn a lot from that. I want to learn a lot from that because I think what defines ideas these days look more like inventions as opposed to the ideas of the past. So we learned that from Google, from some of the other companies. We're learning a lot about the role that when you marry and commingle technology with a creative idea, you can come up with something entirely fresh and new, again, more like an invention, which I think is very exciting. So we're learning a lot about the role of technology and how that can enable creativity. I think that's exciting. How the media owners are coming into the space, I think is very interesting as well. I think they're packaging properties, and their ideas to them are properties and platforms. We're learning from that. So I think it's going to be part of the metamorphosis of our industry. So we're open up to it. So yeah, they don't need the advertising agency of five years ago. But I think more and more we're learning, we're incorporating skills. We're a really fast adapting industry. And, you know, I think some of us are not going to survive and some are going to survive and thrive. So, and a lot will depend upon your ability to be open and learn and be inclusive.
Yeah, I think the old model is broken. I don't think we should
Which
really
model
be,
specifically?
the advertising agency
The old
model.
advertising agency model, okay.
Yeah, I don't think we're really advertising agencies. I think we're as much marketers, creative marketers, as we are creative advertisers. So all of our clients are pushing us to help them grow market share, help them grow their business. So we have to focus on programs from TV all the way down to the experiential to try to move metal, move retail, move whatever product and brand that we're selling. So we have to do that in very creative ways. Obviously, we have to understand our consumers and understand their interaction with content, with digital. But at the end of the day, we're all being judged or graded on how we've grown that client's business, because not that creative awards aren't great for creativity itself, but in these days and times, I think the client is really looking at us to be a marketing partner to drive their business.
I was going to say, I think the reason why digital, for me, digital kind of is ubiquitous right now. Everything is digital, so it's almost, you know, to say something is digital is kind of like saying it's everywhere in my mind. You know,
Because if you're not digital, then you haven't caught up.
well, I mean, you know, at home is digital. I mean, everything is digital. So it's like wherever you look, it's digital. TV, you know, went digital when February or whatever. So everything has a digital component to it in some format. You know, for us, it's like, you know, the great thing about today, getting back to Google, is that the consumer behavior-based data that's out there that you get through quote unquote digital is very powerful. It helps to drive creativity. And for me, creativity, when you look at it, is a much broader term than just creative. There's design aspects of it, there's user experience aspects of it, there's technology aspects of it, there's media aspects of it. Media, you know, there's going to be a shift. Paid media is going to start to decline. There's going to be a shift that's going to go into more kind of us and the creators of content, because earned and owned media are going to have a much larger share of the pie than they used to have in the past. So if you really think about, you know, the data that you get, and that it's consumer behavior-based data, and you use that as a way to inform creativity in this broader term, it will actually help to provide a much more exciting time for us as agencies, but also as consumers. Because remember, the consumer now is the center. It's kind of like the sun, and the content is everything that we create around it. So you got to decide how you're going to actually engage in that with each of those consumers in a way where you get the right mind share. And that's where I think data is really, really important in this new world.
So I think the biggest challenge and opportunity for us, especially say an agency the size of JWT, it's all about the talent. So one of my premises is that it's all demographic. So if you think about the agency that grew up completely transparent with digital on the web, you know, the sooner those people take on more and more responsibility within agencies, and the more courageous agencies are to mix up the talent and not get into the silo of here's creative, here's media.
You mean so that it integrates all throughout the company,
that it's integrated and
right.
you bring in different kinds of talent. I think that's a challenge for us, and that's where we have a responsibility to educate our clients, because I think clients are divided. Clients still have a strategic side that wants to innovate. They want to innovate on their side, but they have a procurement side that kind of drives to more traditional cost-based efficient solutions. So I think agencies, again, have to become more courageous about how they take the lead in putting different kinds of talent in front of our clients.
To build on the talent point too, I think, you know, the best agencies going forward will hire people who have collected different experiences. You know, we look to hire hybrid people that have worked in promotion agencies, in all forms of marketing agencies, in advertising agencies, and I think the days of people living on our end in a silo are long gone, but we as an industry haven't embraced that from a talent perspective. Promotion people generally work in promotion agencies, advertising people generally work in advertising agencies, and so we've set the mandate that anyone with over a certain years of experience has to have collected different experiences. because it's so interwoven today. So, and I
And do you have a hard time finding that?
I think there is, some people would say that there's an excess of talent today because of everything that's happening in the job market. I think there's actually the opposite. I think even with the excess of people that are out there, it's very hard, and it's hard in specific areas. It's obviously hard in the digital world, any kind of digital hiring, whether it's digital planning, digital strategy, strategic planning has always been very difficult for the last few years. So yeah, it's hard. I think the hardest bit is finding people that are truly impact players who have worked in different types of experiences and can bring that and put it all together.
But do you also find that it's hard, and I'm speaking more to to the bigger established agencies, like JWT, like yours, as well as Publicis, which is that you might have that talent, but it's hard to retain them because they're moving on to younger, some would say fresher, younger, startups or smaller shops.
For us, I don't think, talent is always a huge issue because our business is so dependent upon having talented people. I mean, that's really what it is. I don't think we're having all that much trouble recruiting great talent and retaining great talent. And because we're looking more broadly. I mean, everybody is. Everybody's looking not just in the industry, not just the same old places. And one of my biggest fears related to talent and related to the industry is to lock in too soon to the kind of talent we're looking for or the kind of company we want to be. In this time of unbelievable change, I think we all have to work very hard to resist the temptation to redefine ourselves and get on a path too fast. It's almost like, I don't know how many of you have know someone who's a freshman in college. That time period in your life is so amazing, and you go in from your high school where you were so sure about everything, belonged to every community, and then you walk into college environment and you don't know anybody and you're not part of anything, and everybody puts pressure on you to sort it out, lock in, get on a path. At the time where you should be most open and most experimenting and our industry is a little bit like being a freshman in college, Everybody's pressuring us to, are you digital or not? Are you design focused? Are you this? Are you that? What kind of talent are you going to get? The most important thing we should do at this point is be open and learn and experiment and explore. That's what we should be doing, is learn as much as we possibly can and resist the temptation from the clients, from the new business consultants who are trying to define us. Resist the temptation to define ourselves too narrowly. We should be open, which isn't to say be so amorphous that we're nobody. But I think that's our biggest issue, is don't lock in. Don't allow people to pressure us to define ourselves in a very narrow way.
I think we do a horrible job as an industry with talent development and with career pathing. On average, the advertising industry, the marketing communications industry most firms will spend under 1% of their profit on talent development.
Under 1%?
Under 1 percentage point. If you look at our clients, most of all of our clients, Fortune 50, Fortune 100 companies, they spend 5 times that. So, you look at models like management consulting where people come in the door, there's a very solid career path, there are programs in place. I'm sure every one of us has put the first name of our company and put university at the end of it. We've all got those programs, and they're great, but they're nowhere near the investment that we need as an industry to really have people want to be a part of this next generation.
Would you all agree with that this industry does a terrible job?
I think that's a good point. I think we spend a lot of time on recruitment and not enough time on training and development. But I think it's also a challenge now because, again, if you look at the younger generation coming in, what all the research indicates is that they're not into the same kind of job career path that a lot of us have. They want more change. They want to move around more. I saw some research that was fascinating. As plugged in as they are to technology, they don't want to be addicted with the 24/7 BlackBerry around their neck in terms of being on all the time. So that's going to force us to work differently. I think the model is going to be I think all the points you made, I agree with. I think we have to have a more open model. I think we have to be willing to have different arrangements with different types of people based on what skills they bring, which is frankly if I look at a lot of the business that we've won in the last 4 or 5 years, especially in the technology area, it's because we've become much more flexible about the type of talent we bring in, the conditions we bring them in on. Are they project-based? Are they staff-based? And I think, it's harder to do that in a big company, especially when you're part of a public holding company, but we have to do more of that.
Yeah.
I think the environment within the agency, particularly for younger talent, is very important, where they feel like it's not so what they may have heard about advertising agencies, maybe a little stiff, maybe a little too structured. You know, I think there's got to be a senior core of people that really know the business, and then you bring in people from wherever who you feel have just talent, period, just are good creative people, good thinkers, and you nurture that, and then you form that thinking. Maybe it's kind of an unaware thinking, but you take your senior people have to take that unbridled thinking and kind of make it work into a strategic direction that works for our clients.
I think that's a really great point. I mean, one question that always goes through my mind, I'm just curious, Mad Men, right? I mean,
I was going to mention that.
I just came back from Asia, and it's amazing how many people watch that show. I actually think, my own theory is that's been a positive recruitment thing for our industry, because it shows, even though it's advertising in the 60s, it shows people having fun, there's a certain sexiness, a certain glamour. And I always say we have to get back to the entertainment side of what we do. I think, and I'm part of a big holding company, I think the holding companies in some ways have had a negative impact on the agencies, because there's been so much pressure on financial delivery that we forget who we are in terms of the creative side of it. And I think Mad Men is actually a good reminder of that. So,
You mean you're allowed to have fun in this
Those
business?
are before the days of sexual harassment.
You know, clients have always looked to our business, they still today look to us and our people as a fresh perspective, you know, whether it was all of what Mad Men brought, but they still, our industry, part of what I love about it is still more fluid, it's looser, it's a little bit more informal, and it is, in the end, it is about creativity and ideas and imagination. And in the context of, if you think about, we all work with clients, and you put yourself in their shoes, the clients are going through, this is an incredible time for them. The pressures, and you know, just in the last week, I think I've been in 3 meetings with CMOs of big companies, basically kind of talking about what we have to do together, needing these big transformational ideas that are going to help them get into and benefit from whatever recovery there is out there. They're really looking for, and we are an opportunity for some fresh thinking, some fresh air, some perspective, and I think we still do play that. And we're also more resilient and optimistic than a lot of clients. We're hopelessly optimistic, I think, sometimes, but it's very important to bring that. I agree that we can play an important role giving clients confidence, optimism, and a fresh perspective, and some moments of humor, I guess.
So I would just say, like, to that point, is that to all of the bigger agencies, I think the ideation process needs to open up, because, you know, for the longest time, there's this kind of lead agency model that's been out there. And ideas come from a lot of places. You know, you bring the young talent, and I love your comment around that. I love the young talent. You know, I live in Silicon Valley, and I meet with you know, young startup companies. Met with this group of kids who just graduated from Stanford in June, and they just bring a fresh new set of thinking to the table that you sometimes, you know, that you just kind of lose. But as you grow up in your career, what you gain is the experience in how to kind of put those ideas and package those and bring them to the client in the right way. That along with the fact that you have to have more than, you know, one agency in the room, I don't really care. You know, it's the best idea wins, no matter what agency it comes from, and no matter what client it comes from, in that sense. And so there's this sense of collaboration, and this gets into integration, that there's this fear still out there around the fear that if an agency comes up with an idea that they become the lead agency. I'd like to see a spirit of partnership much more than there has been in the past.
I think just one point on the back to creativity. I think it's interesting. We're almost come full circle from 40, 50 years ago, where advertising agencies had test kitchens in the agency so that they could understand the product better, so that they could formulate claims for clients, so that they could help to really partner to sell the product. And I think that, you know, and even if you talk about the disintegration of the business, what's happened with media companies, we're putting it all back together again today. So I think it's interesting that we've come full circle. I think, you know, to creativity, what clients will always need, and we talk about being their creative business partner, is they will always need that form of creativity from an agency, whatever discipline the agency delivers and in whatever relationship they deliver. And I agree. I think that, the smarter agencies are realizing that in the end, if the client wins, we all win. And it doesn't matter whether the media agency wrote the tagline, as long as we can all work together and get the sales or whatever our metrics are to where they need to be.
To get that deal.
It isn't just about integrated. I agree with all of your points. The silos have to come down and the duplication has to go. But I don't think I've ever collaborated with so many competitors. I mean, the other interesting thing is it's not just across disciplines. We're more and more in the interest of a client having to team up with people that are fierce competitors of ours. And that, I think, is a fundamental change in our industry, and it's just going to continue, that more and more we have to kind of get those kind of competitive feelings, put them aside, and start working with each other again with clients. It's an open system is the new way of working, really.
So that's the difference between, I think, growing up digital and growing up traditional a little bit, is that digital, we were we were always, our best friends are our competitors.
Yeah.
We go to the same parties, we probably, have spouses that are working for them. But the point is that in some ways we help each other out, but we still compete. And it's a completely different sense of competition, in a way. That's the part that I like about the digital industry, that I'd like to see more pervasive throughout the entire marketing kind of landscape.
I want to get back though to the Mad Men reference, because
In every way.
not just the idea of of it being almost kind of this attractive recruitment vehicle for talent, bringing talent to the industry, but there's that whole era of the lone creative genius at an advertising agency, the lone wolf there that was the irascible kind of the guy that would just create. And I wonder if that era is over with. There aren't people like that anymore.
I think it's complicated. I mean, I think what's interesting, all of us here probably do a lot of new business, right? I mean, no matter how big your agency is, no matter how small, clients buy into when you're trying to pitch a piece of business, clients buy into teams, and within those teams they buy into leadership. And even if you have business for a long time, that's what they want. So I think there's still a phenomenon, and I think it's part of human nature, that clients gravitate towards leaders. Now, I think what's different, to me, the big change, and going back to what you were talking about, is I think those leaders don't necessarily have to come from the conventional disciplines. I think, the old model was either a creative, traditional creative leader or traditional account leader. Now you can have a strategic planner lead a piece of business. You never saw that years ago. You can have a digital, I really believe you can have a digital creative lead, and I've seen evidence of that even at JWT. So I think that's the change, but I think that there's still a psychology of leadership that clients will always be attracted to, because they're looking for that. They're looking for somebody to come in and tell them what to do. They want that kind of outside advice. And I think, there's no way you're going to do that in a very homogenized, kind of, communistic team-like approach. I'm not saying it's communistic, but you know what I mean in that sense. But I think,
I agree with that. I think internally you need leadership as well. I mean, I'm a big believer in teamwork, no doubt, but everyone looks to a leader. I was told many years ago that there are more sheep than shepherds, and people will follow a strong leader, and that's internally as well on the client side. There's a relationship that has to be built up, and a confidence that has to be built up from a client to an agency lead. And it doesn't have to be an individual. It doesn't have to be me. It doesn't have to be you. There are a number of people who can take that leadership mantra, but it is still very necessary. There are no lone wolves either. I think a good leader brings collaboration amongst the team.
I think cultural alignment, too, is more and more important today between a client organization and a marketing communications company's organization. And, it's finding that matching DNA. If I look at our most successful partnerships, we're an extremely entrepreneurial company, they're an extremely entrepreneurial company. We like to do things quickly, they like to do things quickly. And if I look at some of our relationships that are long-standing relationships or even shorter ones that aren't as healthy, there isn't that match in the DNA. So I think, that kind of synergy will become more and more important, because, clients can go anywhere at any time for an idea.
I think innovation is really benefited by diversity of input. And I think more and more every single idea that we create has to live up to a higher standard of
But
innovation.
doesn't that at some point slow things down too?
It can slow things down, absolutely, especially if people don't know so a lot more time has to be spent saying, okay, in this team, you own this, you own that, and if you don't spend time doing that, people duplicate, they look for, they argue about process and direction as opposed to be goal directed, but if you can get beyond that, absolutely, I believe innovation. I think we need to be more innovative today than we did they did in the Mad Men days. I mean, we had captive audiences then.
Right.
And basically you had a message, and you were the first doing so many things.
Right.
Today we have to put a lot more energy into being innovation, and the standard has been raised. So I see it every day. You bring a diverse group of people into a session, you are clear about the goal and what needs to be accomplished, which isn't always the case. Too many sessions are spent arguing over process as opposed to focusing people on the goal, but you focus them on a goal or a vision and you kind of let them loose. Absolutely, innovation is benefited by diversity of input, absolutely.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things, a little bit tangential to what you were saying, is that that we're finding more and more is that we're becoming more change agents for our clients. They're asking for us to help educate them more around what's happening in the marketplace, where they can get, where they can be outside their industry, where they can go to events, how we personally as an agency help them as well too, and that's a big is a big challenge for us as an agency, because we're not just about doing the work anymore either. It's not just necessarily about the innovation, but it's actually helping ourselves as well as help our clients to tackle what's going on out there with the consumers. And that's a big difference. And how we solve that, I'd have to say the consulting industry has done a much better job of solving this than the agencies. But it's more and more clients are coming to me and asking me to do this with some of the director or even VP level marketers. It's a big change.
So we have just about, I'm looking at the clock, about 6.5 minutes. I want to continue this, but I also want to start getting questions from the audience. And so, yes, you, the man in the white shirt, I think. You can stand up. And I don't know if we have microphones. Do we have microphones here? Or if not, just stand up and speak very loudly if you may. Did you all hear that?
Pricing.
Okay,
yeah.
pricing,
I mean,
right.
this has been the debate in the industry for decades now. I think, and there's been many models that have been floated, both on the client side, whether it's Procter, Coke, a bunch of different models. I think, I spent a decade in consulting, and I think another example of the consulting field getting it right, where you're paid for the deliverable. We're paid for FTEs, we're paid for people. I think that where we need to get to is, and we have a few relationships like this, you give me X dollars and I will deliver, ABC off of that. And I think we're still, I've not seen any agency who's really cracked the code. I think we're all playing with it. And I think the biggest challenge with it.
Why is it hard, though, to crack the code?
I think the biggest challenge is client organizations, especially in this economy, don't want the unknown, the variability. So if you take what a lot of us have, performance-based compensation, where we take less profit for a higher return if we meet whatever the agreed upon metrics are, there's that unknown out there for the client. There could be a 10 to 15% swing on a 10, 15, 20 million revenue piece of business is something that hits their bottom line and that they don't know how to control for, or don't want to control for. So I think that's a challenge. I think, as it relates to inter-agencies and agencies working together, again, I don't think we figured out, when someone's the lead agency, there are a lot of models where we'll be paid to be lead agency, but we may not crack the code, and that's where I think we're still trying to figure out what the best way is.
I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges we face is, no matter what client you work with, there's a very strong issue of procurement. And the problem is that you have CMOs on one side who want the best possible work and want you to innovate, but procurement doesn't come into them. They come into the financial side. So that's where I think, again, I use the word courage. There are certain situations that come up where I think an agency has to have the courage to say no and push back. That's number one. Number two, I think where we need to be more innovative and we're not, and I think this is where, you know, we have to have a certain level of humility, is we're not really building compensation models around IP and content. I think if you think about where the industry was in the Mad Men era, it was very simple. It was 15%, 17.65 on production. We need to get back to a model where creativity has more value. And, you know, I think, you know, we have one client, for example, where we actually developed a TV property that's been on air. And I think the learning I got from that is, if you want to get a client to change the way they're going to work with you on the compensation level, you, the agency, have to be willing to put skin in the game. And that's not something we've been willing to do, and that's going to require a certain amount of courage and experimentation.
I see a lot of nodding heads among
And I
your
think
colleagues, yeah.
that was my learning, you know, in a good way, from, you know, doing something that was great, but we didn't really figure out the compensation correctly. So that was, you know, the lesson I got out of that experience.
I think we all put skin in the game, because whatever the prescribed profitability amount is, the client always squeezes you beyond that number. So we all have skin in the game at the end of the day. I think clients through procurement do themselves harm in terms of getting the best ideas, because it's hard for agencies to collaborate with one another to come up with the best idea when the client is basically throwing a jump ball at you and saying, I'm going to pay for the best deliverable idea. And that happens in some cases. So it really pits talented people against one another,
Right.
to try to get the work done and get the maximum compensation out of it. So when they started to, when clients started to price our business like they did automotive parts, it became a very difficult situation, and I think it's hurt the agencies, but it's also hurt the client as
Hurt
well.
the clients as well. I want to get to, we've got quite a few questions, yes.
What about relationship between agencies and advertisers? Speak a little about what a great partnership with publishers looks like.
Okay, let me just repeat that question, because I don't know if the whole audience will be able to hear you, but you're basically saying, what about the relationship of the partnership between the advertising agency and the publisher, right? Okay.
So publisher, any media outlet.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll give you one example. We're agency of record for the Atlantic Media Company. So we we did that for the creative opportunity, but we also did that to create an interesting partnership model with a media company. And so we're doing everything from, you know, hosting high-level dinners with them, to conducting proprietary research, to working with them on building back-end solutions. So I think, and we're just kind of playing with that model right now. I don't know, and we looked at a bunch of different models. There are publishing companies that have in-house agencies. Many of the media properties right now basically have, you know, marketing departments that they take to sell their platforms. I think as agencies, what we need to do is find unique ways that best serve us to be able to then service clients, take those ideas to clients.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. So the lady in green?
There's a trend in some agencies to create their own brands, their own products, competing and developing as individuals and ownership, and also doing negotiation with clients to some extent. Is that the way?
I mean, for agencies to develop their own brands, is what you're saying. Okay, so her question is, there's this trend of agencies creating their own brands, and are you asking if that's and own products?
I
And
don't-
is that the trend going?
Yeah, I mean, I think, honestly, I can see that in some ways, but I think open source is a much more, a better direction to go. In other words, you create products, you let the consumer use it. Sometimes you do it on behalf of the brands, and it comes back to you in spades from a client perspective, you know. But there are some places where you might create your own, that you just find yourself in a place where you create a product that you might want to take to market. But, you know, where we come from, going out there creating your own product and marketing it is almost like creating a market that you don't even really know exists. And I think that goes against innovation and experimentation, personally.
Yeah, I don't see it as a big trend per se. I see more what Bob was describing, which is we're creating more and more, in a way, utilities or tools that clients can use, useful inventions that we have a stake in. And more, I think we're going to see what you described, put some skin in the game and partner with the clients. I don't see having your own product. We had Our New York office last year dabbled in that a little bit, and we actually had a Publicis beer. It didn't do very well in the market, I have to say, but I thought it was pretty good. But anyway, I think it was great that we experimented. I like doing it because, again, it's part of try new things, take a look, feel how creating something in a different arena with a different end goal makes you think, opens you up creatively. So I love doing it and experimenting a little with it, but I don't see it as a big business opportunity unless we get really better at it.
I think one thing I think you will see is we have 3 clients where we are innovation agency of record. So we basically work with their innovation department to help them develop products, move it through their stage gate process, and our compensation depends on how far it goes through that process. I think it's a small percentage of our revenue, but the way we see it is incremental revenue. It is interesting, creative news value for the agency, but the self-serving benefit of it really at the end is when those brands go to market, if and when they go to market, we become the agency for those brands, and that's written into the agreement. So I think it will never dramatically change our business model, but I think it's changing how we engage with clients.
I mean,
We're a little different in that we're developing content programs that we're becoming partners with our clients on that are target large affinity groups. And if we get those affinity groups to switch, if you will, to our clients' brands, then we have some upside as it relates to that increased sales volume and market share. And we like that kind of program because it, in some cases, can be revenue generating beyond the original compensation agreement with your client.
This is probably a heretical notion, but if you think about, to your question about product development and invention, if I had to pick a company that I would like to be more like in our industry, and not exactly like, but more like, wouldn't be a company in our industry, it would be more like IDEO, really thinking about using really incredible behavioral insight married with creative design sensibility to invent new things. So the experimentation and new product, I think, is great because it gets us closer to that, but because I think we really do need to become more inventive in everything that we do.
Okay. Our time is up, but I could probably go on for another hour. This has been very, very interesting. Thank you so much to the audience for sticking around in this. I want to thank Andrew, Marita, Susan, Bob, and Don. And thank you for sitting with us. And I think we're going to break and change sessions.